Donald Trump, completely unhinged, angry, and out of control. That's the picture that some former Trump aides say they now have of the former president in the wake of Cassidy Hutchinson's remarkable testimony. One Trump ally even told CNN that Hutchinson's revelations could even make it easier for Republican presidential hopefuls to challenge Trump in a primary should he run. Alyssa Farah-Griffin is back with me, along with Van Jones and Shan Wu. All right, Alyssa, I'm starting with you. One Trump ally essentially said this testimony could basically be a campaign commercial for the one and only Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in 2024. We have seen polling also that shows, for now, that he is in the race. If it were him and Trump today, more people said they would vote for him than Trump. Surprised?
Well, not surprised, but twofold answer. The fact that we're even still talking about Donald Trump after this insane testimony under oath from a former staffer actually speaks to how powerful he is, I regret to say. The fact that he is not already just thrown to the side of history. That said, I guarantee there's a certain governor of Florida who's paying very close attention to how the public is receiving these hearings. There are going to be people who challenge the former president. I think Mike Pence will. I think Mike Pompeo's looking at it. I think a lot of people are seeing a weakened man who the public is just a little tired of. But at the end of the day, he does have a death grip on the Republican Party. But the one thing I always say to my fellow Republicans is, this is no longer a binary choice of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. If there were ever a moment to jump ship from this man who tried to overthrow our democracy on January 6th, now's the time. We could have somebody who will not do that in office.
You were there. You ostensibly have people who still are hoping Trump rises from whatever just happened to him in this testimony. Are they swayed at all? Are they watching? Because you look at the numbers of some other networks, who have been very pro-Trump, and it's like it doesn't exist.
I warn about this. I think we kind of live in a split screen America where there are certain folks who just do not believe what they're seeing in front of their eyes and what they're hearing under oath. This entire congressional committee is illegitimate, so they don't believe it. I frankly have family members who do. So the people need to keep telling the truth. I do think people like Cassidy, who stands to gain nothing from this, that really helps. Somebody who's young, doesn't benefit from this, and had the bravery to tell that story, that's got to resonate with some Americans.
I want to ask you something, Van Jones, because you're sitting here watching this. You were there throughout the whole 4 years, right, talking about some of the things that were happening with Donald Trump. When you see what was said in front of all of America, did it surprise you, or were you one of those people that said, that's what people thought anyway?
Well, it's hard to be surprised anymore. It's hard to be shocked anymore. But what I will say is, it's kind of hiding in plain sight here is, what if the Secret Service had said to Donald Trump, yes, sir, we will drive you to the head of this mob of armed lunatics. I don't care who you are as a Republican. That is the judgment of the person that you want to have with the nuclear codes. If any of this is true, don't worry about the grabbing the steering wheel. Just the request of a sitting commander-in-chief to be at the head of a mob should shock everybody.
Those are strong words, and I think there's a lot of people looking forward to say, wait a minute, in this testimony, we saw the statements that were either emails sent to people who were going to testify. And for a lot of people, that sounded very, for lack of a better word, mob boss-like. Going forward, when you hear what was written to some witnesses before they testified, are there potential people who might get charged with tampering, with trying to stop a witness from going forward? Is that possible, that more charges could be coming?
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, those kinds of charges, I think, are low-hanging fruit for the Justice Department. It's not going to require a lot of hand-wringing over, am I going into an area that's never been done before, charging a former president? This is standard playbook, witness tampering, easy to do. And so I think that's why those may be really more easy standalone charges in a lot of ways.
Shan, here's the hard question. I know. I like to throw the hard ones at you. You're a lawyer. We do that to you. The hard question is, how long would it even take if the DOJ did decide, okay, we're going to make a case against the former president of the United States? Aren't we talking months, potentially years, that this could take to bring a case like that? Because if they lose, what are the consequences?
Well, take that in two parts. I think The losing question goes to prosecutorial discretion, what they're worried about doing. And here, as other people have said, I mean, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, the consequences of not making him accountable, his inner circle accountable, are really devastating for the democracy. I mean, this is a case that has to be tried. Practically speaking, you're exactly right. It will take a while to get it in the pipeline and actually try the case. And that is a problem. With all due respect to A.G. Garland, who I think is a man of great integrity, I think DOJ is a little bit late to the dance on this, and they're having to play catch up, and that is a definite problem.
Van, I've got to ask you, if this does take a long time, if it never happens, but if it does go forward and it's 2023 or even 2024, is this just going to be one of those political footballs that gets thrown around? The Republicans say, look, it's just a stupid political witch hunt, and the Democrats are like, well, they're not doing much or they're not doing enough. I mean, what happens here?
Well, I mean, we went through 2 impeachments, and it didn't seem to impact much of the Republican base. But I got to tell you, you have a 2-tiered justice system here if he doesn't get charged. Can you imagine some local yahoo in your town screaming and yelling at a bunch of people who go and attack City Hall? That guy would be under the jail tomorrow morning. Can you imagine anybody in your community calling witnesses and saying, hey, I'm watching you? That guy would be under the jail tomorrow. So the idea that you have Trump and his whole operation acting this way, and there's not been a single charge against any of them, it's discrediting for those of us who live in communities that are impacted by over-policing and over-incarceration, watching people go to jail for 20 and 30 years for doing tiny amounts of stuff with 100th of the evidence. It discredits the entire system if there are no charges.
All right, going forward, this is going to be hard for the DOJ. Can we all agree? Like, they're in a tough spot at this point.
I do just want to say, though, that, when they're exercising their discretion, you have to think about defenses and are there any innocuous reasons? And when you think about that here, there are no innocuous reasons. There's no reason for them to be pursuing trying to meet in the war room, trying to go through this memo that Eastman did, because there is no fraud. So really everything that they're doing that comes out indicates that it's a crime.
And I just want to say one final thing. It is not a non-zero chance that this man could be president again. And that's something I think Democrats need to be keenly aware of. I think Joe Biden's in a much more difficult place now to win re-election. This could be the commander-in-chief in just a matter of years.
Let's get in the final word. Alyssa Farah-Griffin, Shan Wu, and Van Jones, thank you guys again for being here.